Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to see our presentation today. We'll be talking about the Great Molasses Flood of 1919. Before we get into our presentation, I would like to introduce myself and the team. My name is Kaya, and I am studying civil engineering here at UW-Madison as a junior, and I'm the project manager.
My name is Maggie, and I am a junior here studying civil engineering, and I am the researcher.
My name is Isaac Taub. I'm a junior here studying aerospace engineering, and I'm a risk analyst.
My name is Teresa, and I am a sophomore studying nuclear engineering at UW-Madison, and I'm in charge of the ethics.
Okay. So before diving deep in, I would like to talk about some really famous engineering or industrial accidents that's happened, such as Chernobyl, that's a nuclear spill that we've known for most of our lives or have seen movies about. But a lot of most people probably have not heard of is the Great Molasses Flood. And you'd be curious of being, why is molasses already a flood in the first place, and why can it be a hazard, such as Chernobyl? So this flood was taking place in Boston, Massachusetts, and then called the North End neighborhood area. This production of molasses was charged by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company called the USIA, and they're also known as the US Purity Distilling Company. And you'd be curious why molasses was produced in such high amounts. And one reason is in the earliest 20th century, the United States was anticipating of entering World War I, and so they needed molasses to create rum and alcohol in general to for munitions for army utility tools and gears. And this was very much a need. And now I can hand it off to Maggie for getting into the research.
All right, so what actually happened with the molasses flood in 1919? According to the Boston government website, the molasses was contained in a 50-foot tall container that held 2.3 million gallons of molasses. And it was stationed next to the railway for ease of transportation and also right by the distillery to produce the products that Kai mentioned. However, on January 15th, 1919, in the middle of the day, bystanders reported that they heard a low rumble and assumed it was just a train passing by. However, it was more than two Olympic swimming pools of molasses that flowed into the streets of Boston. This flow was at an estimated 35 miles an hour, and it was 15-foot high waves, and it covered a half a mile radius of the city. However, this flow caused 21 deaths, mostly from suffocation, from not escaping the molasses quickly, but then also with the cold temperatures in January in Boston, the molasses hardened at night, which made it even harder to escape from. It also caused 150 injuries. It took 4 days for a complete search and rescue to happen, and it took an entire 6 months to fully clean the molasses that had spilled around the city. They used salt water from the ocean to help dissolve the molasses, but residents say it smelled sweet for decades. So what went wrong in this situation? The biggest thing was that the construction of the tank was rushed by the company to be able to hold the molasses faster, and imperfections like leaking and the wall thickness were not properly handled and ignored for a long time. Residents say that the tank leaked from the day that it was built, and children were known to bring buckets to collect the leaking molasses during the day. Another thing that went wrong was the temperature change. A large shipment of molasses was imported that morning, and to move the molasses more easily, it's heated to reduce the viscosity. However, as I mentioned, in January in Boston, it was cold, so the molasses that was in the tank already was very, very cold, and adding the warm molasses changed the pressure very quickly and caused the tank to explode. And now I'll pass it on to Teresa for some ethics.
All right. So we're first gonna go over a bit of the moral fallacies that occurred during this accident. The main thing that happened was due to the increased demand of molasses, the company decided they needed to create a tank to hold more since there was a higher demand. The main demand why there is such a big demand for molasses was because it could be distilled and then sold to different weapons manufacturers to produce powder for like dynamite, smokeless powder, and other explosives. So the company mainly decided they needed to rush the construction of this tank. This led the tank to not being adequately inspected or tested for leaks by filling it with water first, as was standard at the time. The main decisions behind rushing the construction, as well as overseeing the construction, was done by the company's treasurer, who had no engineering background. Every time the tank was filled with molasses, it would audibly creak and groan, and it was well known to the locals that it was unsafe. In fact, local kids would actually go up to the molasses tank and hold cans to the cracks to fill it with molasses and then take it home. In response to all the complaints of the public to the company, they decided not to make the tank safer at all. Instead, they just painted it brown from its original blue color so that the molasses leaking out would better blend in. Later, a laborer actually brought shards of steel from the tank walls to the treasurer's office as evidence of the potential danger, and he simply replied, "I don't know what you want me to do. The tank still stands." This is morally wrong because the treasurer did not see the danger of the tank bursting and basically said as long as it was still there, there was no problem or risk. Everyone knew that the tank was going to burst, and it was just simply a matter of time, and they were all waiting for when it would happen. So, due to another disaster that happened prior of a bridge collapsing over the Ashtubla River simply from the weight of a train carrying 160 passengers in December 29th, 1876. So, after the tank decided to burst, there was different investigations that took place over the next 7 years with a wide range of unclear results. The main three explanations for the failure of the tank were the first one being that during the fermentation process, it produced such high gas pressure within the tank it caused it to burst. Another possible explanation that was proposed was that anarchists set off a bomb near the tank, and the reason why they proposed this was because such bombings occurred earlier in America at industrial plants in previous years. And the third proposed idea was that the tank failed due to structural defects. At the end of the trial, the court ruled that even though the cause of failure could not be determined precisely, the USAI was liable because the factor of safety for the original design was simply too low. The company had ignored numerous signs that the tank was not sound and simply just tried to avoid fixing the issues and just seeing how long they could keep the tank running. As a result, the company had to pay between $500,000 and $1 million total dollars, with giving about $7,000 to each to relatives of the deceased victims. So now moving on to the outcomes of this. During the Great Flood, Molasses flood, along with the bridge that I talked about briefly earlier collapsing, an engineering code of ethics was developed to really hold engineers accountable for their designs. Previously, ones have been talked about. However, there's nothing set in stone that said engineers had to abide by these as well as companies. So this, along with the failed bridge over the Ashtubla River, caused the United States to develop an engineering code of ethics that we still use to this day.
Hi, so now that we got some context onto the Great Molasses Flood, let's talk about some of the financial and economic risks. So the Great Molasses Flood really showed us the dangers of neglecting safety. In 1919, trying to save on cost in the short term led to millions in damages and even lawsuits in the long term. Neglecting safety can raise insurance costs and risk tons of lawsuits, which can be financially devastating for these companies. On top of that, regulatory fines can add up, making these initial savings very costly in the long run. And these regulatory backlashes don't only affect the company that causes the incident, it affects the whole industry. So now let's talk about some of the community risks and impacts. The social impact of ignoring safety standards can devastate communities. When that tank burst in Boston, families lost homes and lives were tragically cut short. As you can see in the photo, houses are ruined and the streets are flooded. It's total devastation there. If a disaster happens, it's the local community that pays the price first. They bear the burden. And once the public trust is broken, not just that company, but the entire industry suffers. People start to question safety practices across the board. If you can't trust one big company that is making your product, then why should you trust any other? So what are the long-term consequences? Why does safety matter? So prioritizing safety and ethics does pay off over time. A company with a strong safety record builds trust with investors, while on the other hand, repeated ethical lapses will damage investor trust and make it very hard for the company to survive in the industry. On top of that, safety attracts top talent. Skilled employees prefer to work at ethical, safety-focused companies. They want to work at a company that is committed to high standards and they want to protect their reputation. Even a single company's neglect can lead to increased regulation, higher operation cost, and a damaged reputation for everyone in the industry. And the Great Molasses Flood teaches us that building on ethics and safety is essential for long-term growth and community support.
Okay. In conclusion, so we've covered from Teresa and Isaac previously that there are some engineering standards that were set, especially from this incident. Since this was such an unexpected, unpredicted accident to happen, especially with a specific fluid of molasses that is very not a super toxic fluid, but can be very dangerous with certain conditions. With Maggie talking about the temperature flowing, is a very historical case study about the safety ethics and how overseeing safety standards cannot be considered among profits of a company. And likelihood, governments have also set very strong regulations for having permits building for construction and having licensed engineers give permission to start building such tanks for industrial buildings and construction. There's also been regulations set for industrial areas to be separated from neighborhood areas. This was initiated in Boston first, and then all the other states have followed through with such laws. And so, in conclusion, we can say that a lot of engineering ethics were brought upon from this molasses incident, and a lot of government regulations in the work safety area of the company has been set. These are our references, and we're ready for any questions.